The convoy was in chaos when the Dandelion Seed arrived. 3 raider ships circled the refugee vessels like predators around wounded prey weapons. Fire lit up the darkness as the convoy's single escort ship fought desperately to protect its charges. Jinho assessed the situation with practiced calm. The escort cannot hold much longer. He said, "We need to get those people off the damaged ships before they breach." "What can we do?" Yonha asked. "1 small cargo ship against 3 raiders. We do not fight them." Jinho replied, "We give the refugees somewhere to run." He opened a communication channel to the convoy and identified himself as a rescue vessel. Response came immediately from a desperate voice asking for any help they could get. "Start preparing the cargo bay." Jinho told Yonha, "Clear everything out and make room for survivors. We are going to be taking on a lot of people very quickly." Yonha moved without hesitation. She had helped Jinho reorganize cargo dozens of times, and her hands knew the work within minutes. She had cleared enough space for at least 50 beings. Ship shuddered as Jinho maneuvered between the raider vessels and the convoy. Was flying patterns that made the Dandelion Seed a difficult target while staying close enough for rescue operations. First shuttle incoming. He called over the intercom, "Get ready." The cargo bay doors opened and a small transport craft squeezed inside. Refugees poured out before the shuttle had even fully landed. Yunha's heart nearly stopped when she saw them. They were Velatha of Valafi refugees with dim lights and frightened eyes. They were outcasts like her caste, out for impure blood or forbidden beliefs, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Please help us," a young mother begged as she clutched 2 small children. The raiders target Valafi ships because no one comes to rescue us. Yonha felt something break open inside her chest. These were her people in a way the elders of Velith Prime had never been. They knew what it meant to be thrown away and forgotten. "You are safe now," she told the mother. "I am going to take care of you." More shuttles arrived as Jinho coordinated the evacuation. The cargo bay filled with refugees of all species. But the Valafi outnumbered everyone else. They had been the primary targets and they had suffered the most. Yonha moved among them and assessed injuries and offered comfort. A human medic from one of the convoy ships joined her, and together they triaged the wounded. "You know what you are doing," the medic observed as Yonha treated a burn victim. "My mother was a healer," Yonha replied. "She taught me everything she knew." The battle outside intensified, and the ship rocked from a near miss. Jinho's voice came over the intercom tight with strain. "We have company on our tail, and I could use some help up here." Yonha left the wounded in the medic's care and ran to the cockpit. Jinho was wrestling with the controls as a raider ship pursued them. "I need you to manage the rear sensors," he said. "Tell me when they are about to fire so I can evade." Yonha had never done anything like this before, but she sat down and focused. The sensor display showed the raider closing in with weapons charging. "Now," she called out. Jinho banked hard, and the weapons fire streaked past them. They repeated this dance 3 more times until suddenly the raider broke off pursuit. "What happened?" Yonha asked. "Reinforcements," Jinho said with relief in his voice. A patrol of system defense ships had finally responded to the distress calls. Raiders fled rather than face real opposition, and the convoy was saved. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. They transported the refugees to a nearby station where emergency services waited. Yonha worked alongside human and alien medics to treat the injured. She lost count of how many wounds she bandaged and how many hands she held. When the last patient was stable, she finally allowed herself to rest. She found a quiet corner of the station's medical bay and sat down heavily. Her body ached and her light had dimmed from exhaustion, but she felt more alive than she had in months. A small Valafi child approached her shyly. The girl's light was barely visible, and her eyes held the same lost look Yonha remembered seeing in her own reflection. "Are you the one who saved us?" the child asked. I helped, Yana said gently, but many people worked together to bring you to safety. The child sat down beside her without asking permission. Your light is dim like mine, she observed. Does that mean you were broken too? Yana felt her heart crack at the question. No, little one, she said firmly. A dim light does not mean we are broken. It means we have been through hard times. But hard times do not define us. She let her light glow as brightly as she could manage. It was still dimmer than a pure Velothi, but it was steady and warm. We get to choose who we become. Yanha continued, and I choose to be someone who helps others. That is worth more than any amount of brightness. The child leaned against her, and Yanha put an arm around the small shoulders. They sat together in comfortable silence until Jinho found them. The convoy leaders want to speak with you, he said. They are talking about setting up a permanent medical station on a neutral world. They want to know if you would be interested in running it. Yanho looked at the child beside her and at the refugees filling the medical bay. She thought about her mother who had died helping strangers. She thought about her father who had given his life, protecting the innocent. She thought about Jinho, who had saved her simply because someone needed to. Yes, she said, I would be interested. Weeks later, Yanha stood in the entrance of a small clinic on the neutral world of Haven's Rest. The building was modest but clean and stocked with proper medical supplies. Refugees from a dozen species had already found their way here seeking care. Jinho was preparing to leave and continue his cargo routes, stood beside his ship with a small package in his hands. I have something for you, he said. He opened the package to reveal a pendant on a simple chain. Inside the pendant was a tiny white seed preserved in clear resin. Humans call this a dandelion seed, Jinho explained. When we were children, we would blow on them and make wishes. The seeds would scatter in the wind and take root in new places. He placed the pendant in Yana's palm. Hope works the same way, he said. It spreads when we share it. You are going to do a lot of good here, Yana. She put the necklace on and felt a small weight settle against her chest. Will you visit? She asked. Every time my route brings me this way, Jinho promised. Someone has to make sure you are eating properly. They embraced, and then Jinho walked up the ramp into the dandelion seed. Yanha watched until his ship disappeared among the stars. Then she turned back to her clinic, where her first patient of the day was waiting. It was a human child with a scraped knee and tears on her cheeks. Her mother stood nearby, looking worried and uncertain. Yanha knelt down to the child's level and smiled warmly. Hello, little one, she said. My name is Yanha, and I am going to help you feel better. The child looked at her with wonder instead of fear. She had probably never seen a Velothi up close before. Your skin glows, the child whispered. It does, Yanha agreed. And do you know what? The glow gets brighter every time I help someone. The child smiled through her tears and held out her injured knee. Yanha treated the wound with gentle hands and a peaceful heart. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Her mother had given her the gift of healing. Her father had given her the gift of compassion. And one human cargo hauler had given her the chance to use both. Outside the clinic window, the stars stretched endlessly into the darkness. Somewhere out there, Jinho was flying toward his next destination. Somewhere out there, refugees were searching for safety. Somewhere out there, hope was taking root in places no one expected, and Yanha would be here waiting, ready to help whoever needed her, ready to pass the kindness forward, ready to prove that light could shine from the most unexpected places. This was her purpose now. This was her home, and she had never felt more whole. The dandelion seed drifted through empty space on a long haul between systems. These quiet stretches were Yana's favorite times aboard the ship. There was no cargo to organize and no patients to treat, just the hum of the engines and the vast darkness. Outside in time to think, she had been carrying her mother's memory crystal for nearly 3 months now. Every day she told herself she would access it, and every day she found a reason to wait. but tonight felt different somehow. Tonight the weight of not knowing had become heavier than the fear of learning. Jinho was in the cockpit running system checks when Yanha approached him. "I am going to do it," she said, and he understood immediately what she meant. "Do you want to be alone?" he asked. Yanha shook her head. "I think I need someone with me in case I fall apart." Jinho nodded and set the ship to autopilot. They moved to the small common area, where Yanha sat on the warm couch. She held the crystal in her trembling hands and watched the light inside pulse faintly. Memory crystals were activated by touch and intent. All she had to do was focus on wanting to see what was inside. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes and opened herself to her mother's final message. The crystal grew warm in her palms, and suddenly, she was no longer on the ship. She stood in a projection of her mother's private chamber, back on Velth Prime. Sunwoo appeared before her, and the sight of her mother's face made Yonha gasp. She looked tired and sad, but there was also a deep love in her eyes. "My precious daughter," Sunwoo began, and her voice was soft with emotion. "If you are seeing this, then I am gone, and the truth has been revealed. I'm so sorry for the pain this must have caused you." Yanha wanted to reach out and touch her mother, but the projection was just light and memory. "The elders told you that your father was not Velati," Sunwoo continued. "This is true, but there is so much more to the story than they know." The projection shifted and showed a younger Sunwoo on a diplomatic mission to a human colony. "I was sent to negotiate medical exchanges with the human government. I expected to find primitive beings with nothing to teach us. Instead, I found David Yan." The name hit Yonha like a physical blow. Her father had been human. She was half human. Everything she had believed about herself was changing again. David was a diplomat and a translator, Sunwoo explained. "He was kind and curious, and he saw me as a person rather than a representative of my species. We worked together for 2 years, and somewhere along the way I fell in love with him." The projection showed Sunwoo and a human man walking through a garden. He had dark hair and warm eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up everything around him. Yuna could see pieces of herself in his face. "When I became pregnant, David was overjoyed," Sunwoo continued. "He wanted to return to Velith Prime with me and raise you together. But before we could leave, there was a border conflict." Sunwoo's light dimmed with old grief. David died protecting a group of refugees from raiders. He gave his life for strangers because that was who he was. That was the human way. Yonha felt tears streaming down her face as she listened. Her father had been a hero, and she had never known he existed. "I returned home and told the elders that Counselor Minjun was your father. He had died during my absence and could not contradict me. I know it was wrong to lie, but I could not bear the thought of you being cast out. I wanted you to have the life I could not give David." The projection moved closer, and Sunwoo's eyes seemed to look directly at her daughter. "You carry both of us inside you, Yanha. The Velothi gift for healing and the human gift for compassion. I always hoped you would find your way to human someday. I hoped you would understand why I loved your father so much. Promise me you will not let the elders define who you are. You are more than your bloodline. You are everything your father and I hoped you would become." The projection began to fade as the memory reached its end. "I love you, my daughter. I always have and I always will. Find your light and let it shine." The crystal went dark, and Yanha sat in silence as the weight of everything she had learned settled over her. Jinho had not moved from his seat across the room, waited without speaking until Yanha was ready. "My father was human," she finally said. "He died saving strangers, just like you would do." Jinho nodded slowly. "It sounds like he was a good man." Yanha laughed through her tears. "The one person in this entire galaxy who showed me kindness was human, and it turns out I am half human myself. What are the chances of that? Maybe not as small as you think." Jinho said gently, "Maybe you were always going to find your way here. Yonha wiped her eyes and looked at the man who had become her closest friend. "You knew," she said, and it was not a question. "I suspected," Jinho admitted. "There was something in the way you responded to small kindnesses, something that felt familiar. Why did you not say anything?" "Because it was not my truth to tell. You needed to discover it for yourself." Yonha set the crystal aside and took a shaky breath. "I do not know what to do with this," she admitted. "How do I be both Velothi and human when I do not fully understand either one?" Jinho leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "You do not have to be one or the other," he said. "You can be something new, something that takes the best of both and makes it your own. Humans are stubborn." He continued, "We break, but we do not stay broken. We find reasons to keep going even when everything seems lost. You have that in you, Yona. I have watched you rebuild yourself from nothing these past months. That is the most human thing I know." Before Yonha could respond, an alarm cut through the Kui. Jinho was on his feet instantly and moving toward the cockpit. "Distress signal," he called back. "A refugee convoy is under attack by raiders." Yonha followed him and watched as the navigation screen lit up with emergency beacons. "How far?" she asked. 20 minutes at full speed," Jinho replied. "We can make it if we leave now." He looked at her with a question in his eyes. They both knew that responding to the distress call meant putting themselves in danger. Raiders did not care about neutral parties or small cargo ships, but they also knew that there were people out there who needed help. "My father died protecting refugees," Yonha said quietly. "I think I understand why now." Jinho nodded and pushed the engines to maximum. The dandelion seed leaped forward into the darkness toward danger and toward purpose and toward the chance to save lives. Yonha watched the star streak past and felt something settle inside her chest. She finally knew who she was. Now it was time to show the galaxy what that meant. The trading post of Meridian Station was busier than most places. The dandelion seed visited ships of all sizes filled the docking bays, and beings from dozens of species crowded the corridors. Jinho had a large delivery to make here, and he needed Yonha to help with the cargo inventory. They had been working together for nearly 2 months now, and Yonha had found a rhythm to her days. She woke early and reviewed the manifests while Jinho prepared breakfast. They ate together and talked about the route ahead, or sometimes about nothing important at all. Then they worked side by side until the day's tasks were complete. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was a life that was more than she had expected when she first arrived at Kethra 7 on their second day at Meridian Station. Yonha witnessed something that stayed with her. She was walking through the market district when she heard shouting from a side corridor. A Gorvathi trader was yelling at a small family of Kethrani who had apparently knocked over his display. The Kethrani were insectoid beings with delicate limbs and large, frightened eyes. The family had 3 children who huddled behind their parents as the trader demanded payment for his ruined goods. Yonha was about to walk past when she saw 3 humans approach the scene. They were crew members from one of the cargo ships based on their uniforms. The lead human stepped between the trader and the frightened family. "How much for the damage?" she asked calmly. The Gorvathi named a sum that was clearly inflated by anger. The human did not argue but simply pulled out a credit chip and paid. Then she turned to the Kethrani family and spoke softly in their language. The parents bowed repeatedly with gratitude as the human waved off their thanks. "Just help someone else when you can," she said, as her crewmates helped the family gather their belongings. Yona watched the whole exchange with fascination. The humans had not known the Kethrani family and would probably never see them again. They had paid money they could have kept for themselves, and they had asked for nothing in return except that the kindness be passed on. She thought about this as she returned to the dandelion seed. "I saw something strange today," she told Jinho over dinner. She described what had happened in the market. and the way the humans had helped without hesitation, Jinho nodded as if none of this surprised him. "We call that paying it forward," he explained. "Someone helps you, so you help someone else. Eventually, the kindness spreads further than any one person could reach alone." "But why?" Yanha pressed. "What do you gain from helping strangers you will never see again?" Jinho set down his utensils and thought for a moment. "My grandmother used to say that humans are like seeds," he said. "We do not live very long compared to some species, but we can plant things that outlast us. Kindness is one of those things." Yanha considered his words carefully. The Velothi measured value in bloodlines and legacies and the accumulation of knowledge across generations, but humans measured value in connections and moments and the small choices that rippled outward. Neither way was wrong, but she was beginning to understand why her mother had loved a human. The next day brought an unexpected test of everything Yanha was learning. A dock worker named Senna approached the dandelion seed looking for Jinhosh. Was a Morvith with leathery skin and 3 arms, and she was clearly in pain. "I cannot afford the medical station," she explained through gritted teeth. "But someone told me you have a Velothi aboard who knows healing." Yona felt her heart skip as Jinho looked at her with a question in his eyes. She had not practiced medicine since leaving Veloth Prime. The elders had stripped her of her credentials along with everything else, but she still had her mother's knowledge and her mother's texts. "Show me what is wrong." Yana has said before she could talk herself out of it. Senna's injury was a deep cut on her middle arm that had become infected. Wound was red and swollen and clearly needed proper treatment. Aona examined it carefully while her mind raced through everything her mother had taught her. "I can help you," she said finally, "but I will need some supplies." Jinho produced a medical kit from the ship's storage without being asked. It was basic, but it contained enough for what Yanha needed to do. She cleaned the wound and applied antiseptic and carefully stitched the torn flesh. Senna winced but stayed still as Yonha worked with steady hands. When it was done, Yonha applied a bandage and gave Senna instructions for keeping the wound clean. "Change the dressing every day and come back if you see more redness spreading." Senna looked at her arm with amazement and then at Yonha with gratitude. "What do I owe you?" she asked. Dana remembered the humans in the market and the words they had spoken. "Help someone else when you can," she said. Senna nodded and limped away with a lighter step than when she had arrived. After she was gone, Jinho put a hand on Yana's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. Yana felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. "I do not know if I am ready to think about that yet." Word spread through the station about the Velothi healer who worked for free. Over the next few days, more beings came to the dandelion seed seeking help. A Tirani with a respiratory infection, a human child with a broken finger, a Gorvath the elder with joint pain that made walking difficulty on her. Helped each of them as best she could with limited supplies and fading memories of her training. Some cases were beyond her abilities, and she had to admit her limits, but even then she tried to offer comfort and direction to proper care. Each patient she helped made her feel more like herself. Again, not the self she had been on Veloth Prime, but a new self that was still taking shape. One evening, as they prepared to leave Meridian Station, Yana found Jinho on the observation deck. He was staring out at the stars with an expression she had come to recognize as thoughtful. "You could stay here," he said without looking at her. "The station could use a healer, and you have already made a reputation for yourself." Yana stood beside him and watched the distant lights. "I could," she agreed, "but I am not ready yet. There is still so much I do not understand about who I am now." Jinho nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Then we keep moving," he said. "There are plenty more stations and plenty more people who need help." Yona smiled, and it felt strange on her face because she had not smiled in so long. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you have done for me." Jinho shook his head. "You did the hard work yourself," he replied. "I just gave you a place to do it." They stood in comfortable silence as the ship's engines hummed to life. Yonha thought about her mother and the secret she had kept. She thought about the crystal that still sat unopened in her bag. Soon she would be ready to learn the truth, but for now she was content to let the stars guide her forward. She had lost everything she thought she was, but she was beginning to find something new, and that something felt like hope. Yonha woke to the hum of engines and the smell of something cooking. She opened her eyes slowly and found herself lying on a narrow bed in a small cabin. The walls were metal, but someone had hung colorful fabric on them to make the space feel warmer. A blanket covered her body, and a pillow supported her head. She could not remember the last time she had felt so comfortable. "You are awake," a voice said from nearby. Yonha turned her head and saw the stranger from before sitting at a small table. He was older than she had first thought, with lines around his eyes and gray mixed into his dark hair. His hands were rough from work, but his expression was patient and calm. "Where am I?" Yonha asked, and her voice came out as a rough whisper. "My ship," the man said as he stood and brought her a cup of water. "The dandelion seed, if you want to know the name." Yonha took the water and drank deeply because her throat burned with thirst. Man watched her with quiet concern, but did not push her to speak. "I am Jinho Park," he said when she had finished drinking. "I haul cargo between the outer stations, and I found you on the dock 3 days ago." 3 days. Yonha repeated with suppressed. Jinho nodded, and his face showed no judgment. "You were in bad shape, so I brought you aboard and let you rest. My friend Tarek runs the docks, and he said no one had come looking for you." Yonha felt a bitter laugh build in her chest, but she did not let it out. Of course, no one had come looking for her because no one cared. If she lived or died, why did you help me? She asked. Instead, the question seemed to confuse Jinho for a moment. "You needed help," he said, as if that explained everything. "I was there, so I helped." Yonha stared at him because his answer made no sense to her. Among the Velothi, everything had a purpose and a price. No one did anything without expecting something in return. "What do you want from me?" she asked, and suspicion crept into her voice. Jinho's expression shifted to something that might have been sadness. "I do not want anything from you," he said quietly. "I just did not want to watch someone die when I could do something about it." He stood and moved to the small cooking area where a pot bubbled on a heating element. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I made soup, and there is plenty for two." Yonha's stomach answered before she could, with a loud rumble that made her face flush with embarrassment. Jinho smiled slightly and ladled soup into a bowl. He brought it to her along with a piece of bread that was slightly stale, but still good. Yonha ate slowly at first, and then faster as her body remembered what it felt like to have real food. Jinho returned to his seat and ate his own portion in silence, did not stare at her or ask questions, or make her feel like she owed him anything. When she finished eating, Yonha set the bowl aside and looked at him properly for the first time. "You are human," she said. It was not a question, but Jinho nodded anyway. "Born on a colony world called New Bazine about 47 cycles ago by your counting." Yonha had learned about humans during her education on Veloth Prime. Her teachers had described them as primitive and short-lived and driven by selfish impulses. They were supposedly incapable of the higher thinking that the Velothi prided themselves on. But this human had saved her life for no reason and asked nothing in return. The Velothi say that humans only care about themselves. Yonha said carefully. Jinho shrugged, and something flickered in his eyes. "People say a lot of things about humans," he replied. "Some of it is true, and some of it is not. We are not perfect, but we are not monsters either." He paused and looked at her with curiosity rather than judgment. "What do the Velothi say about themselves?" The question caught Yonha off guard. "That we are enlightened," she said slowly. "That our light shows our purity and our connection to the divine. That we are meant to guide lesser species toward understanding." The words felt hollow in her mouth now. Same people who claimed such nobility have thrown her away like garbage. And yet here you are, Jinho said gently, cast out by the enlightened ones and saved by a primitive human. Yanha felt tears prick at her eyes because he was right. Everything she had been taught was crumbling around her. I do not know what I am anymore, she admitted. I thought I was Velothi, but they say my blood is impure. I thought I had a home, but they took it from me. I thought I knew my mother, but she kept secrets from me my whole life. Jinho was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. I lost my daughter 8 years ago, he said, and his voice was soft with old pain. Sickness took her, and there was nothing I could do. My wife blamed me for not being there when it happened, and she left. For a long time, I did not know who I was either. Yonha looked at him with new understanding. This human carried his own grief and his own scars. How did you find yourself again? She asked. Jinho smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. I stopped trying to be who I was before, he said. Instead, I focused on who I could become. I started hauling cargo because it kept me moving and gave me purpose. I help people when I can because it reminds me that I still have something to offer. He stood and gathered the empty bowls. You can stay here as long as you need, he said. I could use help organizing the cargo manifests if you want something to do. It does not pay much, but it is honest work. Yana felt something shift inside her chest. It was small and fragile, but it felt like the first spark of hope she had known since her mother died. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked again. This time, Jinho paused at the cooking area and looked back at her. Because someone might need it. He said simply, that is enough. Over the following weeks, Yana settled into life aboard the Dandelion Seed. The ship was old but well-maintained. And Jinho clearly loved it. Taught her how to read the cargo manifests and track shipments across different systems. The work was simple, but it gave her something to focus on besides her grief. They traveled to small stations and forgotten outposts, where Jinho delivered supplies. At each stop, Yonho watched how he interacted with the beings around him, treated everyone with the same quiet respect, whether they were wealthy traders or desperate refugees. She saw him give extra food to a family who could not pay. She saw him refuse payment from an elderly Morvath whose medicine had been delayed. She saw him sit with a grieving father and say nothing because sometimes presence was enough. None of it made sense according to everything Yangha had been taught. Humans were supposed to be selfish and short-sighted. They were supposed to care only about their own survival. But Jinho lived as if every small act of kindness mattered. One evening, as they traveled between stations, Yonha asked him about it. Your people help strangers so freely, she said. Do you not worry about being taken advantage of? Jinho considered the question while he adjusted the navigation controls. Sometimes people take more than they give, he admitted, but that does not mean we stop giving. If we only helped people who deserved it, we would never help anyone, including ourselves. Yana thought about his words for a long time after that conversation. She thought about her mother who had helped refugees. Despite knowing the risks, she thought about herself and whether she deserved the kindness Jinho had shown her, and slowly she began to understand that kindness was not about deserving it. It was about choosing to make the world a little less cruel. That night she pulled out her mother's medical texts and began to read them again. The knowledge inside had once been her future. Perhaps it could still be her purpose. The light inside Sunwoo flickered for the last time as her daughter held her hand. Yana watched the soft blue glow fade from her mother's skin until there was nothing left but silence and darkness and the cold weight of grief pressing down on her chest. The healers had done everything they could, but the sickness that Sunwoo had caught while treating the border refugees had spread too quickly through her body. Now she was gone, and Yanha was alone in the crystal chamber where generations of Velothi had said goodbye to their dead. The Velothi were beings of light, and their bodies glowed with patterns that shifted and changed to show their emotions and their thoughts. When a Velothi died, their light went out forever, and the darkness they left behind was considered Sacchardine's own light had dimmed to almost nothing. As she knelt beside her mother's body, she did not know how long she stayed there before the elders came. There were 5 of them, and their lights burned bright white with authority. As they entered the chamber, Elder Chewan stood at the front, and her face showed no sympathy as she looked down at Yanha. The healer Sunwoo brought contamination to our clan, Chewan said, and her voice echoed off the crystal wall side. Looked up with confusion and pain written across her face. She died serving our people, Yanha said, and her voice cracked with emotion. She died because she insisted on contact with outsiders, another elder said, and his light pulsed with disgust. The refugees she treated carried diseases that should never have touched the Velothi flesh. Yanha shook her head because she could not believe what she was hearing. Her mother had spent her entire life healing others, and now they were speaking of her as if she had committed some terrible crime. There is more, Elder Chalmon said, and something cold entered her voice. Your mother kept secrets from this clan for 20 cycles. Yanha felt her stomach drop as the elders exchanged glances. Your father was not Counselor Minjun, as the records claim, Chewan continued. Your mother deceived us all when she returned from her diplomatic mission, carrying you inside her. I do not understand. Yanha whispered. Your father was an outsider, Chewan said, and the word dripped with contempt. Your blood is not pure Velothi, and it never was. The chamber seemed to spin around Yanha as she tried to process what she was hearing. Her entire life, she had believed she was fully Velothi, and that she belonged to this clan and this world. Now, they were telling her that everything she knew about herself was a lie. Your mother hid the truth to protect you, another elder admitted. But now that she is gone, the truth must be known. You are dim-blooded, Chewan declared, and the words struck Yanha like physical blows. You carry the contamination of another species within you, and you cannot remain among pure Velothi. Please. Yanha begged, and tears streamed down her face as her light flickered with panic. This is my home, and these are my people, and I have nowhere else to go. You should have thought of that before your mother chose to pollute our bloodline, an elder said with cruelty. The sentence is exile, Chewan announced. You will be sent to the border station, Kathara 7, where the unwanted gather. You will be stripped of your light name and forbidden from ever returning to Veloth Prime. Yanha wanted to scream and fight and demand justice, but she knew it would do no good. The Velothi Velodu bloodline purity above almost everything else, and once the elders made a decision, there was no appeal. You have until sunrise to gather your belongings, Chewan said. A transport will take you to the station, and after that you are no longer our concern. The elders turned and left without another word, and their bright lights faded down the corridor. Yanha was left alone in the darkness with her mother's body and the shattered pieces of everything she had believed about her life. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she moved through her small home like a ghost and gathered the few things she could carry. Her mother's medical texts went into a warm bag, along with some clothing and a small amount of currency that would not last long. The last thing she found was a crystal hidden in her mother's private chest. It was a memory crystal, and Yanha knew it contained a light message, but she could not bring herself to access it. Yet the pain was too fresh, and she was afraid of what her mother might have recorded when the sun rose over the crystal spires of her city. Lanha walked to the transport dock with her head down. Other Velothi passed her on the streets, but none of them would meet her eyes. Word had already spread about the dim-blooded daughter of the contaminated healer, and everyone she had known her entire life now looked at her as if she were a stranger. The transport was a small coal vessel designed for cargo rather than passengers. Iona climbed aboard and found a corner where she could sit with her back against the wall. The journey to Kathara 7 took 3 days, and she spent most of it staring at nothing. She thought about her mother and the secret she had kept for 20 cycles. She thought about the father she had never known and would never meet. She thought about the life she was leaving behind and the uncertain future that waited for her. When the transport finally docked at Kethra 7, Yanha stepped out into a world that was nothing like home. The station was old and worn with metal walls that showed rust and neglect. The air smelled like fuel and sweat, and desperation beings of dozens of species moved through the corridors, and most of them looked as lost and broken as Yanha felt. She found a small alcove near the docking bay and sat down because she had nowhere else to go. Her light had dimmed so much that she was barely visible in the shadows on Velith Prime. A dim light was a sign of weakness or sickness. Here, it was just another mark of someone who did not matter. Days passed, and Yanha struggled to find her place in this harsh new world. She tried to find work, but no one wanted to hire a Velithi. Her people had a reputation for arrogance and looking down on other species. When potential employers saw her dim glow, they assumed she was defective or dangerous. She slept in corners and ate whatever scraps she could find. The currency she had brought ran out quickly, and hunger became her constant companion. She thought about her mother's memory crystal every day, but she still could not bring herself to access it. Part of her was afraid that hearing her mother's voice would break her completely. Another part was afraid of learning the full truth about who she wasn't. The 10th day, Yanha collapsed near the cargo docks. Her body had simply given up after too many days without proper food or rest. She lay on the cold metal floor and watched beings walk past her without stopping. No one cared about another dying exile on a station full of the unwanted. She closed her eyes and wondered if this was how her story would end. Then she felt something warm touch her shoulder. She opened her eyes and saw a face looking down at her with concern. It was not a Valathi face. The features were softer, and the skin had no glow at all. Two eyes the color of dark earth studied her with an expression she did not recognize at first. It took her a moment to realize it was kindness. "Can you hear me?" the stranger asked, and his voice was gentle. Yanha tried to respond, but her throat was too dry to form words. The stranger reached down and lifted her carefully, as if she weighed nothing at all. "Let us get you somewhere safe," he said. Yanha wanted to ask why he was helping her, but darkness claimed her before she could speak. Last thing she felt was the warmth of being carried and the strange comfort of knowing that someone had finally stopped